back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, December 15, 2016. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani, back inside our warm New York City studio. It is freezing outside, so this is a very good afternoon to talk some MMA with all of you. So we're rolling three deep today. Chuck Mindenhall off this week. Hope you're enjoying your vacation somewhere warm, Chuck. We've got Luke Thomas, who's all bundled up, of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com, and Jeff Wagenheim, who's pretending to be on a beach in Hawaii. He is of the Washington Post. Guys, a lot to discuss. Sorry we missed you last week, by the way. UFC 206 called. We had to be there, but we are here this week, and as always, much to break down. Let's start with the news that broke 2 days ago. We've had 48 hours or so to digest the fact that the UFC has finally instituted, if you will, or they are planning on doing so come February, a women's featherweight title. Now, I think if someone would have asked us a week ago, the UFC brings in a women's featherweight title, is Cyborg going to be involved? We'd all say yes. Cyborg is not involved in this inaugural women's featherweight title fight. It's Holly Holm against Germaine de Randamie, UFC 208, February 11th in Brooklyn, not too far from here. Again, you've had 2 days to digest this. What do you make of the decision to not only A, bring in this title, the 11th UFC belt, but B, more importantly, not include Cyborg in the first fight?
Man, my first reaction was like shocked, partly because we had talked I think a couple of weeks ago, and I think you had reported it, maybe Brett Okamoto had reported it to some extent too, that Holm was going to fight Cyborg at 136, and they said no, 138, maybe not, and then when it got above 140, they said no, and then here she's fighting de Randamie at 145, so I was like, well, that's shocking. To do it without Cyborg's participation, at least at this juncture, the initial one, just seems incredibly insulting for a number of reasons, although they've never had a amicable, working, positive relationship with her to begin with. So in some ways, I suppose it's not surprising at all. But you know what, man? After 2 days of sitting around and thinking about it and like what has happened, and I don't want to like jump the conversation too far forward, but I don't know how I can discuss this point without bringing it up, which is, to me, I just keep going back to those two Bloomberg articles in October and in December when federal regulators from the Federal Reserve looked at that loan that they got, that WWE got to buy the UFC for $4.2 billion, underwritten by Goldman Sachs, underwritten by Deutsche Bank, and they downgraded it all the way to substandard. The principal, merely the interest on this loan annually is more than $100 million. That is an incredibly high number. And I'm not here to say they're going to default on the loan. That's not what this is about. But what it is about is rent is due. Rent is due. And I don't think it's right to just look at this Cyborg situation as an isolated one. It's not. It is part of why they had that interim belt for 206. It is why CM Punk, who, again, we all like, but is manifestly unqualified for this level if we're judging it on fighting terms. The reason why he's going to get a second shot, and there's going to be many more incidences like this, while they're creating belts and putting divisions, is because rent is due. There was always a premium on fighters and moments that could generate revenue. It's going to be at an even higher level as a consequence of this new deal. That thing, more than anything else, is going to drive fight policy and matchmaking in 2017 and beyond.
There was a lot to unpack there, but bringing it narrowly back into that fight, that one particular fight which we started talking about, it seems to me that this had to be a plan. I'm not even sure Plan B would be right. Maybe Plan C or Plan D for this event. I mean, obviously, if you're going to do a 145-pound division and you also have to make a lot of money because that's what the UFC's new owners have to do, Cyborg's got to be involved, and the other person obviously would be Holly Holm because she became a star by knocking out your biggest star. So Cyborg versus Holly Holm, bingo. There's your big money-making event. Well, for reasons that we're not all that sure about, that just wasn't going to happen. Cyborg has said that she was not ready to fight at this date, and so somehow this was not ready to happen, and maybe it could have happened later on, but the UFC, decided that, like you said, Luke, the rent was due. They needed to have a fight for that event, and they decided they'll go ahead without Cyborg. And I am imagining this fight, I just have to think that this fight originally was put together just as a fight, maybe the inaugural fight in this division, with the winner then going on and facing Cyborg to become the first champion. That would seem to me to be a logical thing. Find the person who is qualified to face the person who we think is the most dominant 145-pounder, really the most dominant woman in the game. I'm imagining that was what was originally had to be planned. Maybe that was plan B. But at some point, they decided, well, we need a title fight on this one. Just like, as Luke pointed out, they needed a title fight in UFC 206. So they created a title that really didn't need to be created. Here, this is a title. I'm glad that they're creating a division. That's a good thing. And, Cyborg will get her shot shortly down the road. But, I'm kind of underwhelmed by the first title fight in the 145-pound women's division.
I actually love the fight itself.
It is a great fight.
Super great fight. And these ladies are not going to cut that much weight.
Right.
Love it. Totally love it. I don't want to bash the fight in the context-free situation of, hey, if someone said, what do you think about Holm versus Darren Demi? Be like, this is phenomenal. Sure, let's do it. But remember, too, another thing you can't forget, there's the long-term play of trying to pay down this enormous loan. And the other one is they lost their pay-per-view in January. They can't duff on 2 pay-per-views in the beginning of 2017. They have to really stack it. And with Rousey having competed in December, Conor McGregor's going to be gone. They got to get creative. So, like, on the one hand, if you're Conor McGregor, if you're Cyborg, I completely sympathize with her. That push down to 135, extraordinary, truly one of the great wastes of time in the history of mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
And that is not an exaggeration under any way or mind-blowing how insane that was. But they lost their pay-per-view in January. They rescheduled it.
Yeah.
They got to make money.
Yeah, and it is worth noting that they tried to have Cyborg fight on that January card, which would have made a lot of sense because it was in Orange County. She lives nearby, the arena in Anaheim, so I think that would have been perfect for Cyborg as a draw. She draws well, very well over there. She's fought in Invicta and other shows. She wasn't ready, as you mentioned. Right. And then they did come to her for the February show, and she said she wasn't ready as well. And I don't like the idea of starting this division without Cyborg. Now, people have said, look, when Aldo came over from WEC, they gave him the belt. When Dominic Cruz came over, they gave him the belt. Ronda gave him the belt. This is different. They don't own Invicta. They're not absorbing Invicta's division.
But she does have a Zuffa contract.
She does, but I'm just saying, like, when Luke Rockhold was Strikeforce middleweight champion, he didn't come over and fight for the UFC middleweight belt right away. So it's not exactly, apples to apples, in my opinion. Not quite apples to oranges, maybe apples to pears.
But certainly you would agree, like, if someone said they had a flashcard and they said women's featherweight, what's the 100%. First one that comes to your mind?
I'm just trying to lay out the fact. Chris Cyborg, so then, moreover, the idea that Cyborg wasn't ready, so we need to create this fight without her, to me is hogwash. You need to wait for Cyborg. If Ronda Rousey wasn't ready to defend her title against Liz Carmouche in February of 2013, you had to wait for Ronda Rousey. Chris Cyborg is the women's featherweight division. Chris Cyborg is the greatest female fighter of all time. You have to wait for her. And again, if you're not waiting for her, then you're once again telling us, I thought you just made maybe the best point you've ever made in the history of this show, no lie. Honestly,
really,
it's all about that. It's all about trying to sell as many pay-per-views as possible. We are moving further and further away from a sport at this point. It's just about these prop belts trying to attract eyeballs, trying to make as much money as possible. I mean, just go back. Let's start with UFC 195. 195, Carlos Condit didn't deserve that title shot. 196, putting in Nate Diaz against Conor McGregor, it didn't make any sense. 197, John Jones with the interim belt. Michael Bisping getting a title shot. 200 was a mess in its own right.
Well, Michael Bisping was, late notice.
No, but what I'm saying is, we are now hot-shotting things. We are jumping people over. We're making fake belts. We're doing this. 202 made no sense from a sporting standpoint, but it was all about pay-per-views, and it made good money. 205 as well. The Manchester event with Hendo fighting. You know what I mean? I could go on and on and on. The interim belt in Toronto.
This is the new normal.
This is the new normal. They did such a great job, I think, in the 2000s of building this into a sport. And it still is an athletic endeavor. What they're doing is athletic. It's maybe the most athletic sport out there in terms of what you put your body through. But in terms of these belts and how to get to the belt and the meritocracy, that is being annihilated each and every month. And this, in my opinion, is just another example of that.
I would just add that the everything you said is I agree with some things that I've expressed here for quite a long time, but I would frame it slightly differently and say, okay, if you want to have the biggest money fights out there, fine. Then build your sport around that. That seems to be what they're trying to do. But you really can't have it both ways. You're going to have a meritocracy by having belts and having rankings, then you have to treat those things with respect, or just don't have them. So I have no problem with them creating all the big money fights they want to create, but then don't try to tell me that, well, this is for these super special, intercontinental. It's kind of like WWE, back in the day when all of a sudden there were all these different belts, and that was, and also really, it's like boxing. So you say it's not really like a sport. Well, in a way, it's kind of like the most traditional combat sport that we grew up watching. Boxing has had these belts that have been kind of, rendered meaningless for years and years. And the UFC, it's not been that way. And so I feel like now we're suddenly entering a whole new territory, and I think that's where it's unsettling. Make the money, fine. Have championship fights, fine, but don't try to bend the rules for both of them in order to fit your plan.
I wonder what it's going to do to look as you change the rules, and I don't mean like the rules written in stone, but as the sort of proverbial rules of the game change, they incentivize behavior one way or the other, right? So how is this going to change the way fighters interact with the promoter and with the fan base and even their contemporaries? On the one hand, I'm scared that this will mean that really deserving, talented fighters get passed up even more. On the other hand, if you're a fighter and you're looking at this new normal, as we described it, you can tell if you rattle the cage, there will be some very interesting opportunities that come your way. A couple big fights will make you. Look at Holly Holm, that big win over Ronda Rousey, it's still paying dividends, literally.
Yeah.
And she just lost twice in a row. That is an insane thing to consider, but here she is, a name that people recognize. She drew on Fox. She might have 2 losses, but she can go to 145 and it all works. There's going to be a lot of different opportunities for the fighters who A, get lucky, or B, the ones that create their own luck.
At least Holly Holm created her opportunity in a fight. At least that,
Sure.
when you think about some other people, a lot of it is words. A lot of it is if you're the squeaky wheel, you're going to get that grease, and that's where I feel like we get a little bit, we get a little off center when that starts happening, and it's been happening for a while. But even like Conor McGregor, the biggest star in the sport, I feel like his career has been kind of backloaded with his supremacy as a fighter. The thing that really got him fame first was the way he could spin a tale, the way he could talk. He could talk a great game, and that was the knock on him early in his career. And then he just kept passing test after test after test inside the octagon, and that's when he became something really special, both as a talker and as a fighter. But it was his talking that got him there in the first place. And if more people start trying to do that, I think that's where we're really, really getting knocked off base. At least Holly Holm, she proved herself where you're supposed to prove yourself.
Can we just make this circle back to something that I don't want to pass over here? Can we just take a moment to, if there is one benefit to this 145-pound title, and first of all, I don't mind there being a 145-pound division for women, whether Cyborg is in it
I think
or
we've
she's
all
not in it.
said that we'd
Sure,
like.
fine, great.
Yeah.
Now, I do think that there's a better case to make that 125 will be better
100%.
for, okay, well, I mean, they probably will get there eventually. But just want to take a moment here if we can. That belt, whoever wears it, Randami or Holm, is going to be forever a monument, truly a monument. Tourists should visit it. It should be in Washington, D.C. as a monument to the unimaginable waste that we put in trying to get her to go to 135.
Okay, so let's talk about it.
It is shocking.
Okay.
There is no greater indictment on the foolishness of that belt. We will hold it up like Simba was held up, and the Lion King, and we will praise it and notice for all time how moronic that was.
Okay, but there's a lot to say about that. First of all, Chris Cyborg agreed to this deal.
She has some culpability in it, sure.
I think a lot. I mean, if she was not prepared to do it, why sign the deal? Did she want, the biggest payday of her career? Did she want a 6-figure UFC contract? Maybe. But the deal was you go down to 140, you test it out, and then you go down to 135. And oh, by the way, we're going to hire a nutritionist to live with you, one of the most respected in the game, George Lockhart, and he's going to help you. Mm-hmm. And he has said on many occasions, including my own show, he believed she can make 135 in the midst of all of that.
Okay, I've talked about that too.
He said it, unless someone was pointing a gun to him.
He has said it and said it would come with an extraordinary decline in her ability to perform. That she could make it on the scale is yes, but this is not the biggest loser.
So, but all I'm saying is that like everyone involved agreed to this.
Yes.
So she deserves blame, he deserves blame, the UFC deserves blame, her manager deserves blame. They all deserve blame. Like no one, I don't think it's fair to blame solely the UFC for saying.
And I'm not.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And on top of blame, I would also, again, go the opposite direction and talk a little bit about compassion. I mean, Chris Cyborg, when she was talking about this title fight that's coming up, lost amidst all of her anger at being overlooked, was, she talked about having experiencing serious depression, I believe is the way severe depression. I mean, this is serious, a serious mental illness that people sometimes think, oh, depression, suck it up. That's just not the way it is. And so she's had dealing with that. She's also, the fact that she would not be able to make 145 in February tells us that there's some more going on. I mean, it's one thing to try to push her down to 135 or even 140, but 145 is the weight class that she's always performed in, and so something's going on with her body that she's not able to get to that weight that she needs to fight at, and also the mental side of it as well. I mean, I think this is somebody who, we want to watch her fight, but again, like some other fighters, sometimes there's other things that are going on in their lives that we really need to sort of step back and pay attention to.
Okay, she's missed weight trying to get to 145 before.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the fact that the mere request to get her to 135, I think, was misguided to begin with. Now, to your point, that she agreed to it in some capacity, if not outright fully agreed to it, she bears responsibility in this equation as well. I am absolutely not saying this is all UFC's fault. No,
I don't like when people make her out to be this victim who had no say in the matter.
But you also have to take a step back and you have to say, number one, why are they even asking her to go to 135 in the first place? It's an insane request. Number two, if you're her and you have been berated and you have been maligned, and you are clearly not the favorite son of the promotion, not even close. You and I were there in Baltimore when she was called Vanderlei Silva in a dress. Mm-hmm. When you know this is your reality and they come to you with a door, maybe you do turn it into a Trojan horse. Maybe you take the 135, because if you're a Cyborg and they come to you and they say, okay, well, you can get in, but you got to go 135. What are you going to do? You're going to tell them to F off? They're going to tell you to F off, and you're never going to get a chance to go in there. And I'm not saying entering an agreement under duplicitous terms is okay. I'm just saying the whole thing is a complicated mess. She should never have been asked to go to 135. That's not who she is. That's not who she was ever going to be. Bring Cyborg in. We already knew she was a ratings draw before the UFC even tried to entertain this.
There's two other things I'd love to know. One from her. Between May and September, so her UFC debut at 140, UFC 198 was in mid-May, and then she returned in late September for her second fight against Lena Landsberg. That's around 4 months. And so there's 4 months between September and the Brooklyn show. Mm. So why isn't she ready? Is it just because of the back-to-back weight cuts? It's not like they're asking her to come back on 2 months' notice, and now they're asking her to fight at 145. So not 140. Why can't she not do it? Can she just not make 145 anymore? Has she grown up? I don't know. So I'd love to know that answer. And the second thing I'd love to know the answer to is, why did they have to make this title fight on this card? Now, I know they needed something, and they're still working on Jose Aldo versus Max Holloway, but the only reason to create this division is for Chris Cyborg. If not, there is no division. It's just a bunch of 135ers who are being, told to weigh an extra 10 pounds. Why are you creating this division? You were so reluctant to do so for so long because you told us there were no 145ers. Why are you creating it now if she's not a part of the plan? You know what I mean? Like, what was the rush?
It's self-refuting, isn't it?
It's just very confusing. Like, I'm trying to make sense of it. I'm looking at it. She's going to be available 3 weeks later, she claims. Why are you making it now? Why? Explain to us that. Why is it happening now? Why are you in such a rush now? And you weren't willing to do it in September. You weren't willing to do it in May. The only reason to create the 145-pound division is for Chris Cyborg, because you have this dominant champion who's been blowing through everyone for 10 years. This is why you create it. There hasn't been a demand to make this division without her. There's been zero demand. Not even these two fighters.
The rents do, as Luke pointed out. I mean, there's money involved. And then, I'll reiterate what I said earlier. I believe that they were thinking, we'll get these two fighters together, winner takes on Cyborg, and that will be our first title fight. Well, okay. But then maybe they just couldn't make maybe they're not able to get this Aldo, the Aldo Holloway fight together, and they really feel like they want to.
Well, I think they're still working on it. But okay, let me ask you this scenario.
But they haven't.
Sure.
They needed time. If that thing were, if let's say Aldo Holloway was already set as the main event, I believe, and I have not talked to anybody about this, but my belief is that this would not be the title fight. Well, this would be the first fight for women, and then they were saying we're gonna have these two, compete, and then the winner's gonna go fight Cyborg for our first title fight. But I think because they don't have that other one, set in the main event, they got to do something.
You talk about a new normal. Have you noticed that they are announcing these fights almost exactly 2 months before the events on the day or the day before, or sometimes even a couple days after tickets go on sale? Like the old normal of announcing cards 3-4 months in advance has pretty much been washed away. Like they are doing these 2 months. They're going up until the wire. They did that with the one on January 21st and had to cancel it because they couldn't find anything. Let me ask you about this scenario. Is it possible that they're doing this with the hope in the back of their mind, to your point, selling pay-per-views, making a ton of money, home wins, Ronda wins, champion versus champion? And if you do home versus Cyborg, it's tougher to get that fight because Cyborg would probably be the favorite in that fight. Mm-hmm. So you eliminate the Cyborg issue for a moment. Ronda's about to fight. This fight is going to happen a month and a half later. Let's try to make champion versus champion, because I don't know if you guys read this article. It came out today, ESPNW, Ramona Shelburne with Ronda Rousey, and Ronda says that, she needs that fight against Holly Holm. So she hasn't forgotten about it. That fight is even bigger if it's champion versus champion, right?
There's no two ways about it.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No.
Jeff.
I was just going to say, I didn't have an answer, but I just keep seeing this dollar signs floating over Ariel's head as he was asking the question. It was like,
I mean, let's be honest. Holly Holm doesn't necessarily deserve a title shot, 135 or 145 at this juncture. She's lost 2 fights in a row. Darren Dami, fine fighter, but top of your head, who'd she beat in her last fight?
All you have to do in modern MMA is attach yourself to a star in some kind of way that people remember, and you can surf on that for months, if not years. Nate Diaz, I think, will be able to surf on this. We're seeing how Holly Holm will be able to surf on this, and I think you're right. Like, I think probably what they would. I don't really know what they would prefer.
Yeah.
My initial instinct is to say if Holm wins, they do Holm Cyborg, because that's what makes the most logical sense for the division.
Yeah.
But what is this division? You always talk about the belts being props. Is the division just a prop? Honestly, that's another way to consider thinking.
And is
about
145 just going to be a division that they ask 135ers like Kat Zingano next or whatever to just move up, or are they actually going to invest in this division?
We'll have to see what they do with it. I mean, I think long term it can actually be something. Sure. In the short run, they're going to have to pull from Invicta. They're going to have to just keep, pulling the fruit out of that garden as often as they can. But I don't. To answer your question, the answer is obviously yes. That is a clear possibility of what they could do, and certainly if Rousey has her way in terms of negotiations, perhaps that's the way she's inclined to have some kind of revenge match that would not only be under those terms, but would also be under the ones where there's all these belts glittering around us. But what will that mean if we continue to do those as we go forward?
Yeah, I would say that I don't know that we could discount the viability of the 145-pound division just based upon this example. I think that if they're creating it, I'm going to assume that they are going to try to really build it. But I think that there are 2 people in the UFC for whom the rules don't really apply. One is Conor McGregor, the other is Ronda Rousey. Because of their particular star power, because they have a star power that really nobody else in the sport has, the UFC is going to just maneuver things around. That's they found a way to get Conor McGregor into that champion versus champion fight. I mean, obviously he had to get there by winning fights and making it happen as well. But they were very eager to make that happen, and it would not surprise me at all if Ronda Rousey wins this month and then Holly Holm wins in February. If that became the next one.
Can I tell you something I really like about this fight? We've been talking about a lot of negatives. Something I really like about it is that fighting for a belt, regardless of if it's fake or not, leads to the fighters getting more money.
Yep.
Max Holloway got paid more because he fought for an interim title.
Sure.
If Holly Holm wins and she becomes champion, she'll get pay-per-view points on her next fight. So in this day and age of all of us, I think, wanting to see the fighters get paid more, this is a nice little silver lining. They're getting paid more. by being thrown into these, Fugazi title fights, and that's kind of good. I mean, I'm actually happy for them that, Holly Holm would not be getting paid the same, if she beats Darren Dami in a non-title fight and then fights her next fight in, some other random, division or whatever. So this is I try to focus on the positive here. That is a nice thing.
It is a silver lining, but when you unpack it and realize that if we're not treating titles with the respect of a meritocracy, then belt holders can be people who are kind of the favorite sons and daughters of the promoter, and therefore the money goes to the people that they want to pay the money to. So there's certainly, but I commend you for trying to create a silver lining in the. And it is, and I also agree with you guys. I don't want to downplay this fight as a horrible fight. It's not a bad fight that they've set up.
No,
it's just not. It's not the fight with the best.
It actually makes a lot of sense for Holly Holm as she tries to get back on track.
Yeah.
I mean, this is great matchmaking.
Right.
It's just doing a featherweight title fight without Cyborg feels weird.
Take the belt away and it's a fine fight.
It's a bit of an Anthony Pettis vibe.
In terms of what?
In a different way. Like, clearly she's having problems in her own weight class, so why not try another one?
Oh, yeah.
She's going up in this particular case as opposed to going down.
I don't think she was clamoring to go up or to change scenery.
No, I don't think she was either, but it just feels a little bit like, let's see what happens when we change the scenery. Does that change the life around me? But to your point, look, every company's trying to make money, but if there's a heavy emphasis on event over event, drawing a ton of money, even if we all have issues with the rev split, if there's going to be if the aim is to really generate that, certain fighters are going to be able to benefit quite substantially from that.
Does the UFC have a star-making problem now? I mean, this is a story that comes up every few years, but are they doing this because they're worried that their current champions can't sell enough pay-per-views? Do they feel like the belt will add enough buys to justify instituting them? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you go down the line and you look at heavyweight, light heavyweight, how many pay-per-view draws are in the UFC these days?
No, there's not many. And the truth of the matter is, like, there was interesting that happened around when did Conor McGregor, would you say, blew up? 2014-ish?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like, really began
say,
to
like,
turn the corner.
post Dennis Seaver World Tour.
Yeah, that's when you really begin to be like, ooh, something's happening here. You know? I mean, he was obviously making noise, but I mean, like, really turned the corner. And what was interesting was when he blew up, and also Rousey was sort of a big star at that time anyway too, or not as big as she is, but she was getting there. Their success did a lot to quiet the debate about oversaturation, right? Because there was this tremendous success, and not merely for their own events. I think they had a general halo over the course of the product. But you wonder if they had never happened, what really would we be saying today about the product? I'm not here to say it's in any kind of ill health. I don't mean that necessarily, but that, to your point, is there an issue where if you don't catch lightning in a bottle, what does the rest of the rank and file look like? And again, I do think that the product is healthy, but to answer the question, it's going to be interesting to see what they can do without those two, at least in constant rotation. I think there's a reason to think that making stars is a very, very difficult, inexact science. In many ways, Conor McGregor made himself. Rousey benefiting from, of course, making herself and then external circumstances. But now we're going to see to what extent this new regime with this new style of matchmaking and event promotion can pull someone from nothing and turn them. I mean, is it alchemy or is it really science? And I think we're going to find out.
Yeah,
I think the equation has changed because of what the demands are on the new ownership. I mean, as you were pointing out earlier, the amount of money they have to earn in order to even just to break even, is a pretty astronomical amount of money. And then to make a profit, they're not in it to break even. They're in it to make some money. They really have to think about star making. The old regime of the UFC. I mean, not to say that these guys were turning money down. The Fertittas were not people who are turning money down, but they were also they always talked about building the sport. And I think there was a strong element of that, and that they sometimes, at least for a good portion of the time they were running the company, they were kind of front-loading it as, let's build this sport, and the star power is going to come along with it. I feel like maybe now we're at a time where it's the opposite. We're going to build the star power and hope that the sport comes with it.
Yeah, it's also interesting because I feel like take for example UFC 206. I've seen you say it. I was saying it. Like, that was a really good card on paper going into it, and I almost feel like the media was in charge of having to convince people that this was a good card. Like, I kept getting messages people saying this card sucks and it's the worst pay-per-view of all time. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? Like, look at the card.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't understand. Maybe they're not doing a good enough job of educating. Maybe there's too many shows, so they only have 5 days to really promote these cards. I mean, how much promotion has gone into the Sacramento card? And I think that's a fun card as well. So I think that over time, I'm not here to say that the UFC doesn't have stars. They do have really good fighters. I mean, again, look at 206. Those were great fights. That was maybe the card of the year, but people need to know about it. And a guy who, you know, helped make that one of the great cards of the year was Max Holloway. And, you know, you kind of feel funny, I think, when, you know, we're on a show like this and we crap all over the interim title, which I think is deservedly so. And then you see how happy he is getting that belt. And you see how happy his neighbors are that he got that belt, and you see what it means to him, and you see that now he can make a little bit more money, he can fight Jose Aldo, and you kind of, I don't know how you guys feel, but like I kind of feel bad criticizing the belt now, because if someone is going to own the belt, you know what I mean, and say, like kind of like what Conor did when he beat Chad Mendes, he was all like, I'm the champion, and everyone's like, well, you're not really the champion, Aldo's still the champion, he just fought 6 months ago. The way Holloway treated that interim belt, in some ways made me believe in that belt. Do you get what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And it made me happy for him, and it made me say, like, you know what? They should start pushing this guy. This guy is deserving of some kind of belt around his waist.
That's dovetailing with his own efforts at self-promotion. Where
it's all him. Yeah.
So I think if he was just like doing the old John Fitch in his prime bit, being like, I just, you know, just line him up, I'll knock him down, and be like, all right, well, whatever, he's got the belt.
Yes.
But Max is a feel-good story.
Yeah.
Max is a guy who's on an incredible win streak. Max is a guy who's trying to get out there and let people know about himself and trying to pull other fighters, even adversaries, into his orbit. And, you know, showing up to the parking lot with a Pizza Hut and your belt, everything, and your people there in Waianae have like posters built on like old cardboard boxes. Man, that is incredible. It's truly incredible. So to me, it's the belt is a sweet touch to his story, but his story is actually encompassing a lot of different factors.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I embrace that to some extent, but it's kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, yeah, you want to celebrate that these guys, that someone feels a sense of accomplishment. On the other hand, you know, I coach youth soccer. When my daughter was this high, and we were, you know, and one of the moms made little medals for all the kids afterwards. You know, the whole thing about participation trophies. You're a new parent. You will be learning about this. Sure. Where your kids will be playing, and they don't win the championship, but everybody gets a trophy. And there's a lot of back and forth on that. And on the one hand, I think it's great to recognize somebody's accomplishment, but you also have to. I mean, you just can't. Everybody can't have a trophy. Everybody can't have a championship belt, and there is only one champion in that division. And so, as much as I kind of appreciate what Max Holloway went through, I still can't look at that and say, well, yeah, but that's the champion.
Okay, so if and when he fights Jose Aldo, will that feel like a real championship fight for you guys? Like,
Super.
Are you?
Yeah.
You're okay with it?
He is the clear #1 contender.
Yeah.
You know, now that Conor McGregor's gone.
Now, who's Aldo?
Aldo's your champ.
He is?
I mean, this is the funny part about this. Everyone was like, Conor McGregor's cleaned out featherweight. Well, only if you can't read or write would that ever make sense to you, right? Oh, truly, if you are brain dead, that argument makes sense. If you have a mammalian brain that is firing...
Not while I'm drinking water, please. This thing almost went all over.
If you have look, there might be some people out there with reptilian brains. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not here to say I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
But the truth of here's the point. He was this hurricane who came through featherweight, right? I mean, I don't know how you can describe him. Just took it over the division by storm, beat many of the best guys, including the best guy, crushed him in 13 seconds, and he went on his way. But the truth of the matter is, he didn't wreck the entire village. There's a lot left standing, and I think in that wreckage, the reason why we're able to look at featherweight, we're like, wow, look what happened between Cub Swanson and Doo Ho Choi. That was incredible. Look at the rise of Max Holloway. That is incredible. And you know what? Jose Aldo was still around, and they can go down the division. Featherweight is actually still great. If he had truly just decimated it, you wouldn't be able to say that. You'd be like, you know, it's okay, this is okay, whatever. Max Holloway is doing things in mixed martial arts that almost no one else is doing. And of course, him and McGregor had their time, but this is the point. Look at Max Holloway. If someone said, would you want to see a second fight between Max Holloway and Conor McGregor at 145 or 155, what real fan would say no to that?
Well, actually, on Fight Night, I did one of those snazzy Twitter polls, and I asked that exact question. Which fight would you rather see right now? Holloway, McGregor 2, Aldo, McGregor 2. Got 22,000 votes.
Whoa.
And Holloway won, 52% to 48%. narrow, but he still won.
So here's the best part. Like, I think actually it'd be bad for the division if Aldo wins, because you'd be like, okay, what do you do now? But if Max Holloway goes in there and beats Jose Aldo, man, does that create a bunch of new and exciting matchups. It certainly connects him. You know, he's been kind of distancing himself from McGregor, but like putting the focus on Aldo, which I think is the right thing.
Why? Is that a mistake?
No, I don't think it's a mistake.
Why?
It would be interesting if he was making a lot of noise about Conor McGregor. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be, but I think he's sort of smartly saying, there is some kind of resume building I need to do. I did lose to McGregor. I need to get through Aldo. Aldo is this incredible a hurdle for everyone, and that McGregor got through it so quickly speaks to his ability. But I just think it's kind of interesting because if he beats him, then no one can deny him.
Yeah.
And if you just sort of make this about McGregor early, well, you haven't even beaten Aldo yet, it doesn't quite, there's a disconnect for me.
Yeah, also, you know, McGregor just relinquished that belt, and, you know, you don't want to feed into that whole dynamic. You don't want to keep talking about Conor McGregor when you're setting up a fight at 145. You want to kind of push him to the side as much as anybody can. I mean, the guy always will impose himself in the story as much whenever he wants to, but you want to get him aside, focus on the guy who is the champion now, and just go about your business. After you take care of business, if you take care of business, then you go on and see what you can do with Conor McGregor.
Do you guys find it interesting that Dana White asked Holloway in the cage right after that fight, like literally a minute later, you know, Brooklyn, February 11th, 208, you down, and Aldo does interviews 2 days later, and he's saying, like, I'm in. I've already agreed to this fight. So I'm assuming they thought that the winner of Pettis, Holloway, would agree to the fight as well because it's Aldo, it's Brooklyn, etc. And Holloway is now saying, like, no, I want to have brunch. And I love that he's always talking about brunch. It's never lunch, it's never breakfast, dinner, it's brunch. Max Holloway likes his brunch, but he's like, yeah, I want to have brunch. I want to talk to the new owners. He's saying kind of the same thing that Conor said, like, hey, guys, you know, let's have a chat. Tony Ferguson on Twitter the last couple days, he's like, yeah, you know, this Khabib fight is fun, but I want to have a chat about my contract. What's happening here?
These guys know that WME needs these big fights.
Yeah.
They know it. They know. Well, how about this? The smarter ones know it.
But it keeps happening where the guy wins the big fight, and he's like, yeah, I'm not going to jump into the next one.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
Them? They know that they need these guys big time. Khabib versus Tony Ferguson, talk about star making. I don't think those guys are there yet, but, you know, they could be there. Again, they're in that orbit of Conor McGregor. You attach yourself to that guy, good things will happen for you for a very long time. Diaz being proof about.
Sure.
Well, not for everyone, but certainly it can happen. So I think that these guys are realizing if I get a big fight where this is what I call like not a crossroads fight, but you can make a left in the road, you can make a right in the road. I made the right, which was the right one, and now I have a little bit of hand because they need to your point, they got to make that schedule, and then the deadline for tickets is coming right behind it. They're also trying to make fights in closer proximity. You know, Cerrone is making that easy on them, but he's not the only guy trying to do that.
Sure.
Win and get right back in there. These guys are realizing they have the hot hand. They're trying to use it. Smart.
It is a bit of a high wire act, though, because, you know, if you're Conor McGregor, you can do that. You can dictate your terms because you've proven that you can sell a lot of pay-per-views, a lot of tickets, and you can make back all that money that they need to make. All these other guys, you know, Holloway, for example, these are guys that are stars in the making, but they aren't quite at Conor McGregor's place yet. And there's always the danger that if you play too much hardball, the UFC might just go to the next man up. And that, you know, could be, you know, or just kind of, you know, just look in another direction. If you're not like a proven money earner like Conor McGregor is or like Ronda Rousey is, I think it's a little bit more dangerous. Not to say they shouldn't be doing it, but I'm just saying that there's, you know, maybe there's a safety net at the bottom. The safety net is that these guys need to make these shows right now, and they'll maybe the UFC will accede to some of their demands. But it's definitely still a little bit of a tight wire act.
I want to quickly end on Cyborg and wrap it up because I'm just curious, in 2017, do you guys feel like she will ever fight for the featherweight title? Do you feel like she'll ever fight in the UFC? Or is the relationship damaged beyond repair?
No, I don't. I think they definitely, I mean.
You think so?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's money to be made, right? They're not going to turn down a buck. And it's not just money to be made, it's potentially a lot, and a lot of different opportunities. So, I mean, they might have their differences, and I think that we have to acknowledge them, but yeah, she'll definitely
You think
fight.
so too?
Yeah, I would imagine she'll be booked against the winner of this upcoming one, unless that curveball with, you know, if it's a Holly Holm and a possibility of her against Rousey. That might put a little make it a little bit less likely immediately, but I do think that it's going to happen.
Anthony Pettis is going back up to 155. Kelvin Gastelum says he's going down to 170, but he's going to remain at 185 at least for now. He's fighting Vitor Belfort in March. We're seeing guys trying to figure out where their careers are at. Do you guys think, and I know this is, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, are guys going to be smarter about their weights? Because I feel like with the new, there is a great story to be written about these new weigh-ins, these early weigh-ins. A lot more people are missing weight. It's almost like you can bang. We're averaging like at least, I gotta think at least one, if not more, a show. Mm-hmm. And it feels like Kelvin Gastelum, based on what he did to Tim Kennedy and how he's looked at 185, like I feel like guys should start to figure out, and females as well, that you don't have to kill yourself to get down to some weight where you think that you're bigger than your opponent. Just maybe stick to where you're healthier. Stick to, like Cerrone. Look at Cerrone, what he's done on 170. He comes to the city, he has to cut 5 pounds, and look how good he's looked. And look at what Gastelum did. And then conversely, look what happened to Anthony Pettis. Do you think that this is part of the evolution of the sport? Guys are figuring out how to negotiate. They're figuring out that weight cutting will also change in the next couple of years?
There's definitely been a spread, to your point, better negotiating, of best practices. I think the biggest issue is for these early weigh-ins, or I should say weigh-ins generally, there is not tremendous amount of incentive to make weight. So
even the 20%?
Okay, so but if you're a UFC fighter, and you know you're going to miss weight, and again, there are some states where this becomes very dicey. Remember the whole New York, you got to be within 5 pounds or something. Those states get it a little bit different, but here's what I mean. For most places, you miss weight. You could even miss weight egregiously in the UFC, like 5 pounds, like Cowboy Oliveira did. And then your fight still goes forward because what's your opponent going to say? Well, I'm not going to turn this down.
Yeah.
Great, you just go forward. Sure, you lose 20% of your purse, but you carry in this advantage. You probably didn't murder yourself. You just said, you know what, I'm within 5 pounds, screw it. Now you have the size advantage, and then a lot of these times you notice these guys who miss weight by egregious amounts. Charles Oliveira has been up and down, but a lot of these guys, they win. So the thought process is, I don't even have to make weight. I lose 20% on the front end, but at least I get my win bonus on the back end. What real incentive do I have to really clamp down on it? And I think going forward, Oliveira's only missed weight one time, for example, Cowboy Oliveira. But I guess my point being is, I think what's going to happen is, you're going to start to see athletic commissions begin to really hammer these guys, where they're taking substantial amounts of money away, or there's some other kind of penalty where they get penalized, they can't fight anymore afterwards.
Like what New York did?
Yeah.
Suspending them.
The administrative one, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you might see things like that. Now, whether that will work too, whether those individual strategies will work, part of me feels like guys are just going to miss weight sometimes, but it'll be interesting to see if they can, again, rules incentivize behavior. Let's see how those rules incentivize future behavior.
Yeah, I also think that that the success of fighters moving up, like Cowboy Cerrone is a great example. I used to look at these fighters and see guys who are, say, lightweights, and then look at somebody who's a welterweight, or even a lightweight and a featherweight, only 10 pounds apart. And I would look at them almost like they existed in two completely different silos, two different universes. But really they don't. Cowboy Cerrone stepped up. You would imagine he would be, okay, maybe he's going to have the quickness advantage, but he's not going to be able to, he's going to get overwhelmed with strength. Well, he didn't really get overwhelmed in his fight with Matt Brown. He was able to, he was able to match him pretty much across the board, and then he ended up knocking him out. It sort of defied the conventional wisdom of what it means to step up. I've always thought when a fighter steps up in weight that their path to victory becomes just being able to be quicker and outpoint the guy bigger than them. But if you can go up there and knock somebody out, why would you want to cut down to a lower amount? It's not just like anybody knocking out somebody who's a really serious fighter. So, as more fighters start seeing this happening, and, Conor McGregor's probably the best example of all, a skeleton on weigh-ins, at the weigh-ins for 145, well, he goes up and fights and wins the 155 belt. He fought up even at 170. This is a guy who, is, you need a bigger star than that to prove prove something, I think fighters are going to start noticing.
Very, very, very quickly. I know we got to move on, but here's something to consider. Also, there is such a thing as being in the wrong weight class. When Henderson tried to fight at welterweight, Ben Henderson, sure he beat Brandon Thatch, but Koreshkov, just mollywopped him. So there's something to be said. It doesn't work for everybody. But here's what I was thinking. When MMA began to really adopt this weight cutting culture, a lot of it came from wrestling. All the guys from amateur wrestling, they would come over and they would have these extensive sauna suits and the whole bit. And I think now, boxers cut less weight in part because there's way more weight classes, but I just think MMA fighters are beginning to take a step back from that hardcore wrestling weight cutting mentality. And also the sport of wrestling is getting away from that too, especially at the collegiate level, where we're in a second evolution of weight cutting strategy, and we'll have to be curious to see where it goes.
Okay, let's stick with Cowboy for a second. Early last week, when Dana White was interviewed on that UFC Unfiltered podcast and asked about the new MMA association, he focused on two things. He focused on Bjorn Rebney, and that was obvious that he was going to do that. And he focused on Donald Cerrone. He didn't talk about GSP or Kennedy or Kane or TJ Dillashaw. He focused on Cerrone, perhaps because he came across as the weak link on that introductory conference call, saying shit, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. I'm just along for the ride. But he did so, and I thought it was strategic on his point. And I thought it worked because a day later, Cerrone's like, wait a second, I didn't know about Bjorn. I'm not really a part of this board. And then later on in the week, he gets a little stronger, and then he says he wants to meet with the UFC, and he meets with Dana White, and he's, I thought, noticeably wearing a ton of UFC gear all week in Toronto. And I want to ask you guys how damaging you thought last week was for that association. I also want to ask you about the fact that, I don't know if you've noticed this, but when they came out guns blazing, Bjorn Rebney was very active on Twitter. He hasn't tweeted in 5 days.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if all the criticism and all the focus on him solely and no one else has led to them saying, Bjorn, you got to take a chill here. You got to go to the back. This is kind of ruining, what we tried to start 2 weeks ago. This thing is 2 weeks old. It's 2 weeks and 1 day old. And it just feels like watching a 100-meter dash and the guy just tripped right out the gate, right? I mean, they had been strategically planning for this thing. They wanted to do it in August. PFA comes out, they delay it, and they come out with the most impressive group of fighters that any association has ever come out with, and Bjorn Rebney just ruined the whole thing. Not his fault, but his past got the best of him. So first, let's talk about Donald Cerrone. How damaging was that when he comes out and was like, I don't really know what I'm doing here, and I didn't know what I was signing up for.
Man.
Did that really hurt them?
Yeah, I think it did. I don't think it hurt them fatally necessarily, but it definitely was a very poor look. Right, when you have this, if you're launching any kind of organized effort, and I don't mean merely labor organization, but let's say Jeff and I have this cause. Jeff wants to get, marijuana legalized federally. I'm not saying he does. I'm just making up.
I do.
I'm just making up a scenario, right? With that, no application to his real life whatsoever. All right. And if he and I were going to be speaking about this publicly, we would have to have the same talking points. We would have to know what the message is, how to deliver it, who's delivering what to who, what do you say, what you don't say. If you ever worked on Capitol Hill, people always leak, oh, look at these talking points that these organized groups had. They need those. That is strategic, because everyone has to be on message. And if you noticed, even on that conference call, the ends of the twine began to fray. I didn't really know, but I don't really know. They called me up and here I am. That was the beginning of the unraveling right there. And then, of course, you mentioned all the different iterations and turns it took during the course of that last fight week. The point being is for an effort that appeared to be 2 years in the making, or whatever the reporting on that is, they didn't build that enough to be ready for that moment. They didn't sit everyone down and go, this is what you can say, this is what you can't say, this is the line we are holding, don't go past this. Because that frayed immediately, not merely with Cerrone, but with Cain Velasquez. He frayed it as well, being like, well, I didn't know this, I didn't know that.
Tim Kennedy even said, initially he said, I think to you, necessary evil.
Yeah, although he defended Bjorn's inclusion.
But in Toronto, he did say he's a little too confrontational. It's getting a little too aggressive. And TJ Dillashaw said the same.
Yeah.
How could they not all be on the same page? There's only 6 of them.
But here's the interesting part about it. I think you're right that they picked, that Dana picked Cerrone, and, it was interesting. Remember when WME, I mentioned this in my chat yesterday, remember when WME bought UFC? You remember what they called the UFC? A family-owned business? Mm-hmm. When you think of a family-owned business, what do you think of? You think of, maybe you have...
Olive Garden? No.
Olive Garden.
I'm kidding. That's the impression that they want to give you.
Right. Well, I think of, maybe the immigrant family who has a restaurant down the street.
Yep.
And they all work there, and they employ a couple extra people, but that's kind of what it is. And there could be many family-owned businesses. That's just the one that comes to my mind. You think it's small mom and pop is the point. But there really was this big one. And what you found was the UFC always had and played with favorites. And I don't think necessarily in a nefarious way. I actually do think Donald Cerrone and Dana White get along. They do seem to be actual kindred spirits. I'm not saying there's not some strategic element to it, but you get the idea. And so to me, everyone's like, what's going to fray it? The fact that this union effort, is it going to be that Donald Cerrone doesn't hold the line in his talks with the press? That doesn't help. Is it going to be that these unions are fighting each other? That doesn't help. But truly what I think will hold it back, and it's not just Donald Cerrone that does this, as long as the mentality is, and he used the words that they're parents to him, and he felt like he had disappointed his parents, as long as that old family business mentality exists from fighter to promoter, it is hopeless for them.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there, but I would say that it's not been a really good look since that outfit came out publicly, and I think that Bjorn Rebney's I think it was fine for them to have him as an advisor, and it would have been if there were a press conference.
You still feel that way though?
As an advisor, because they want somebody who's been a promoter who can give them a little bit of this and that, but have him sitting in the front row of the thing, and we want to acknowledge that we, in order to get our ducks in a row for our labor stuff, we're talking to this person and this person, and we've also getting some advising from Bjorn Rebney, who ran Bellator, and have him be part of a coterie of people who help them figure out where they're going. But to have him up there publicly as a talking, that was just not a good thing. The Cerrone stuff, I agree that he was the guy to address, because Dana White can say, I treated him like a friend. When he got in trouble and he needed money for a lawyer, I took care of that. All true, and that's a commendable thing that when you have a good relationship with a guy like Dana White, it's a commendable thing. However, the counter argument to that would be, well, if fighters were paid more, then Donald Cerrone could have paid a lawyer with his own $100,000, because he would have been making a lot more as one of the top athletes in his sport. So, I think that this organization doesn't need Bjorn Rebney to be out there talking, and doesn't need fighters out there talking, because they're not going to be the ones that are going to be able to drive the story. They need somebody. They need like somebody who's polished and knows how to respond to all the very polished entities that the UFC is going to put out there. Dana White is going to say things, and you need to have somebody who can respond, not bitterly, but just give your perspective, give the other side of the coin, and let people know what you got going on.
It's disheartening that they gave Dana White the out right off the bat. The out is Bjorn Rebney. You notice that he just focuses on Bjorn. He doesn't ever really answer anything about the association. It's just, the name calling, what he did in Bellator. It should really have nothing to do with today, but it's an easy out. And mainstream media kind of chuckles, and they think it's funny that he calls him Bjork, and then they kind of move on to the next thing. And to me, it's like, how did you not see this coming? How did you not see? And people are going to follow his lead. He's a very influential guy, and he's able to set the narrative right off the bat. And could you imagine if it was GSP and Kennedy and Kane and Dillashaw? What would he say? What could you say about those guys? What can you say about those human beings? There's not a whole lot that you can say negative about them as it pertains to the UFC. And it's so disheartening that we're back to 2013 listening to this feud between Bjorn and Dana going on Twitter. It's like, what is this? How did you guys not see this coming? Yeah. And now all of a sudden he's just quiet. To me, someone must have said something behind the scenes, and it just feels like they completely misread the situation. King Mo,
Gonna get finessed.
Have any of these people called King Mo up, the guy who most publicly had this feud? Have any of these people called Eddie Alvarez up? What was your real issue with Bjorn? What was it like to deal with him behind the scenes? How can you? It's one thing to get a promoter, and I understand the thought process, but perhaps the most notorious non-fighter promoter out there. You could say a lot about Dana and Lorenzo, but they took care of some of their guys. Where's the one Bellator guy? Where's the Michael Chandler or the Daniel Strauss? I'm just throwing out Bellator guys.
Running to his defense.
Yes. Yeah. Where are these people? Yeah. There's not a single one. And correct me if you've seen one and I missed it. There's not a single one that's being like, oh, all you fighters who are criticizing Bjorn, Let me tell you from experience, this guy took care of me, and he was true to his word, and he honored his word. Where's that one guy who has no say in this matter? I've not seen one.
Not a fighter. I did speak to some members of his former staff about what they thought about this, and I won't say who it is, but their basic attitude was, look, maybe Bjorn's ego will get in the way, but if he is as committed to the AAA as he was Bellator, maybe he could go places too. They all sort of lauded his hard work. And I do think Tim Kennedy's case for him about why they needed him is it's a very convincing argument.
What is it?
That basically, look, how many guys have promoted MMA, when I say successfully, I mean over the course of several years at a national level? It's basically 4 or 5 guys, and one of them is Dana White, so now we're down to 3 or 4. In getting Bjorn Rebney, he just knew exactly all the different points of sale, how relationships are merged, how to work with different sort of teams, be it online content teams, be it whatever the issue is. From a promoter's perspective, he had this competence about the position that they needed that no one else could provide. That seems to me very strong. The problem is, number one, I agree with you, why was he in any of those pictures? Number two, what you do is you address that on the call the day of. He is barely talking. Someone like Tim Kennedy says, I want to address why Bjorn's on this. He is in this advisory role, and here's why. And they didn't do any of that. It was Bjorn kind of sort of being the maestro. That was a mistake.
And I also don't buy the idea that they needed him because he's a former promoter, and there's so few people out there that have his knowledge, because like look at Donald Fear or DeMaurice Smith.
Buy that?
No, but those guys didn't own sports teams, and yet they're very capable of running a players' association.
Right, but even Donald Cerrone got called up by Tim Kennedy, according to Donald's story, just to show up to this thing. He didn't even know he was sitting on a board. This was put together roughshod. I can see how, at least in an initial stage, Bjorn's inclusion might be helpful. I can at least buy that
With that
idea.
baggage and that history?
Not with the baggage.
That completely erases everything,
Not
right?
in the way they handled it.
Any positives that he brings to the table, his history, whether he wants to admit it, they want to admit it or not, in my opinion, negates it all. And I think that it was you had George freaking St. Pierre there. You know what I mean? You have GSP. I mean, the biggest fish of them all that you can get at this point, not named Ronda or Connor.
Yep.
How can you do this? How can you misread the situation? How can you not recognize that, you know, this fighter who may not know Bjorn but knows, like Cole Miller, for example, off the top of my head, we'll talk to Daniel Strauss, who may not have something nice to say about, you know, like how could you completely misread the situation? So disheartening, and it's disheartening that, again, we're back to 2013 with the name calling and all that. Like, I want to legitimately hear what the UFC has to say about the association. I don't want to hear why they think Bjorn is a scumbag. That has nothing to do with the association. That has nothing to do with the future of the fighters, the well-being of the fighters. And oh, by the way, how about the fact that none of these associations want to even talk to each other? PFA,
Oh,
MMA,
they do want to talk to each other with cease and desist letters.
That's,
what is
that's
that?
the bigger issue. That's the
how
real issue.
crazy is that?
That is the
completely
issue.
misreading that whole how that comes across as well.
The Bjorn thing to me is kind of window dressing. It creates a PR mishmash. You know, it's like
Think about Fighter
muddies
X
the waters.
who has a newborn and is seeing all this happening in front of you. Why the hell would you attach? You're more likely to succeed if you just say, I'm going to put my faith in the UFC, than put your faith in these people, right?
But I think it's really about the infighting. If there's one association and that organization is moving forward and not talking too much to the press, but just getting more and more and signing up fighters, getting more and more fighters, getting a roster where to the point where they're going to be representing, I don't know, 60, 75% of the UFC's roster, then this thing can get off the ground. And that's how. And I don't know that if you can define Bjorn Rebney's role in a very narrow way, I think you could still get those people on board. But if you've got two other fighter associations, haggling with you, then you can't get people on board. Because why would I join this group when I could just join one? I mean, didn't Jose Aldo in an interview on this site say something about, I'm already a member of this, but then he started talking about Randy Couture, so clearly he was actually a member of the other organization. I don't even think he knew, if these are different organizations. And I think
I think he knew. I think he had concerns about Bjorn. He said that. He questioned his intentions and his role in the company, and he said that the MMAFA he liked better because that includes all fighters, not just UFC fighters. So, I mean, I think he knew, but again, like you have Jose Aldo who's willing to stick his neck out. And what's the reason why he's not because he's afraid of the UFC's, backlash or reprimands from, it's Bjorn. Like, I mean, come on, 2 weeks in and this guy's history is I think, cutting their legs off.
Yeah, but it's
how,
about having more than it's about having one organization. Look, Bjorn Rebney is no more of a thorn in the UFC's side than labor leaders in the Major League Baseball Players Association have been, over the past. I mean, there's been some pretty serious thorns in the baseball commissioner's side over the years. This is what happens. But there's only one baseball. There's only one player union for baseball and for football and for basketball. You have to have, if you can't the whole thing about unifying is defeated if you're not unified.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that like it's?
I thought he missed a great opportunity last week to say, the past is the past. I've righted my wrongs. He came on my show, and I'm sorry to say, I thought it was a total waste of time. He wouldn't address what happened with Bellator. It was all trying to go back to the, MMAA. It was never like, he wasn't real. He was still selling us. He was a promoter. And I think that...
Did he use the word magic?
I don't remember, because I wanted to bang my head on the table. I was like, Bjorn, this is your chance to tell us that you've changed, that you're different, that you have new motives, that you've been thinking about this for 2 years, that you want to be different, that you want to... It was very disheartening, and this approach of being so confrontational towards the UFC to me is completely misguided as well.
Should be noted too. I didn't think it was a game-changing week or anything like that, but the MMAFA had a good week.
Yeah,
right. They were all in Congress. They were all Randy Couture testifying at a subcommittee hearing. That was not an insignificant moment, and I think it highlights that older generation of fighters, Fitch, back to Quarry, back to Couture. This is the thing we also have to address. PFA had one model of how they wanted to change things. MMAFA is, Double M, Triple A is kind of in the middle. It's a weird thing what they want to do. And then you have MMAFA, who it's totally, one wants to become employees, one wants to become stay independent contractors. No one's won the battle of ideas yet either.
Yeah, we are running out of time.
Yeah.
I have so much more to ask you guys about, so let's just try to do this very quickly. John Jones gets a year from the NAC, right? And Brock Lesnar today had his hearing, and he got a year and a fine of $250K. And Nate Diaz gets 2.5% of his purse and community hours. What I want to ask you guys about, as it pertains to those three individuals and Nevada, is it seems now like they are making their decisions out of the spotlight. They are coming to these deals, these agreements, and then they're coming on, the conference call and saying, okay, this is what we've agreed to. They're not exactly explaining, the terms of the deal, but it's not being done in front of us. They're not showing us how the sausage is being made. Do you like this new way, or do you want transparency?
Transparency is key. Now, transparency to some extent enables them. We've seen how they handle it, but it also can provide a measure of public backlash when it goes awry, which is in the interest of the fighters, I think, long term. I'd also say that these settlements that we're seeing, maybe they come to reasonable agreements. If fighters are able to use some leverage, then good. Okay, maybe that might be a beneficial thing. But to me, it says to me, who's getting these deals? Guys who had a $2 million purse, guys who had a $5 million purse, guys who who's got several million in the bank. The poor fighters don't really have the ability to access this kind of extra justice, and that concerns me.
I'm mostly concerned for the UFC's Fight Pass, because how subscriptions are going to plummet now that the greatest comedy show on television is canceled. I mean, is there anything more comical than watching one of those Nevada Athletic Commission hearings? Come on, really?
I don't know if this one aired on Fight Pass, and of course Pat Lundvall no longer there, so a little less entertainment. Speaking of this kind of red tape, Angela Hill is supposed to come back to the UFC, and then after the UFC reaches out to her, USADA says, wait a second, you used to be in the UFC, so you have to go into this 4-month testing pool. Of course, this was made famous by one Brock Lesnar when they waived it. I don't understand, A, why the UFC would even reach out to her on short notice if they know that she used to fight in the UFC and would have to go through this, given USADA's rule. And more importantly, 2, if they call you up today and say, we need you to fill in for Sacramento, you don't have to wait 4 months. But because she used to fight in the UFC and got cut and still, went out and worked her way back to this point, she's being penalized. This doesn't seem fair.
It seems weird. Oh, and I saw the debate thread we had internally. I was 100% with you the whole time. I can understand why you wouldn't want someone who had a UFC contract getting cut or leaving or retiring, juicing to the gills, and then coming back. Okay, that seems sensible. But you mean to tell me I can go fight in the steroid league and then just come over to UFC and I don't have to wait? There is a clear gap in the consistency and, frankly, the rationality of the rule set that needs to be fixed. If they want to not penalize, but sort of create a barrier for people like Angela Hill for reasons that anti-doping acolytes might find reasonable, okay, fine. But that needs to be applied consistently.
Yeah, that's the consistency part is the thing that I'm mostly worried about. I think that the rule sounds a little bit odd that if you're a former employee or contractor, you can't fight, but if you're new to the promotion, you can jump right in. That's one thing. Okay, so I don't like that. But the other part of it is, let's see what happens when they get somebody who's a bigger star than Angela Hill, who's coming back. Brock Lesnar, for example. Will they apply these things equally, or will they still be finding some little loophole to slip little tiny Brock in through the loophole?
Well, I think they sort of answered that by making George enter this 4-month testing policy. It didn't come to fruition. Also, Chael Sonnen as well. But yeah, if they're in a bind, let's see what happens. And last thing, UFC's in Sacramento this weekend. It's UFC on Fox, their big year-end Fox event, if you will. And it kind of features a nice mix of vets, Uriah Faber, retirement fight, and up-and-comers, Sage, Mickey Gall, Paige Van Zandt. The fight, at least on the main card, and feel free to throw one out on the undercard because, who knows what's going to happen if they give Cole Miller the mic, for example.
Right.
Which fight interests you the most?
On the undercard, besides the Cole Miller one, the UFC debut of Irene Aldana. Looking forward to seeing that.
Against Leslie Smith.
Yep, that should be a very fun fight.
Yep.
On the main card, though, I just want to say very quickly, and there's all good fights on the main card.
Yeah.
I'm really looking to see how well Mike Perry does against Alan Jouban. Mike Perry.
You're on the Mike Perry bandwagon.
Let me just say something about Mike Perry. Look, is he a little rough around the edges? Has he said some intemperate things? Yeah, of course. But this is a guy who grew up in Flint, Michigan. And it turns out to me that, I don't like being overly penalizing people from blue-collar backgrounds that you can clearly see are making progress in their lives, both professionally and personally. And, his deadlifting form needs work. He and I talked about that.
Yes.
But I will say this. I think that he has gotten, if you watch tape on him from the regional fights to now, his improvement is dramatic. And in that Danny Roberts fight, he showed a very competent ground game. Alan Jouban is a tough customer, but, I asked Mike Perry what he like. What do you see when you see Alan Jouban? He goes, I see a guy with 4 losses. That's who I see. Wow. And he said it with a certain kind of intensity. Let's see how far Mike Perry can go. I'm curious about him.
One of the up-and-comers this year.
Yeah, there's a few interesting fights on this card. But to me, it all comes back to Uriah Faber. And I'm usually not that
do you
much.
Think he'll win?
I do, because it's his retirement fight. I think there's sometimes there is a little bit of those magical things happening, and I'm not always invested in who's the headliner and who does this or that. I feel like this was misguided. I feel like the last guy to walk out to the octagon in Sacramento on Saturday should be Uriah Faber, and that should be, even if they figured out some other way, if they wanted to promote the hell out of the women's strawweight fight, fine, but they should have somehow figured out a way to make him a main event guy. He's been a main event guy for most of his career, and this should have been a main event for Uriah Faber.
No. But I like the sentiment.
Because there's no future there?
No, I like the sentiment.
Because you got to build up.
I just think it'd be logistically impossible to pull off, but I certainly agree that to have a guy, like you're going to have Uriah Faber versus Brad Pickett as your main event on Fox, that seems like a bad idea.
So what's the difference if it's the co-main event or the third fight?
You want to make it a swing fight? You're going to have Paige Van Zandt thing, and then Uriah Faber comes in as a swing fight?
You just like the symbolism. It's Sacramento.
That's the thing. For the television audience, it's a little bit shakier, but it's in his home. It's in his where he's based, his hometown. And it's the last fight. The guy's been he also has been the guy who's been on, not necessarily Fox, Big Fox, but various iterations. Like he's been on the guy who's been like the main event of the FS1 fights, many times. So the audience would certainly know him. I don't know that the Fox audience is going to tune in more likely to see Paige Van Zandt and Michelle Waterson than they will, Uriah Faber. I think he's a bigger star.
I feel like they would. Just given Paige's, history on Dancing with the Stars.
Dancing with the Stars. I guess.
Look, if they had put that fight on Fight Pass, then you could do that. But on Fox, you got to put Paige at the top of the card.
Yeah, it's amazing. This card, while I like it a lot, and there's a lot to really, we've got the young guns, and there's the Paige and Sage show, and there's Mickey Gall and what he describes his first UFC fight, because he doesn't consider the other two real fights. Credit to him for saying that. It's amazing, how far we've come in what is this, Fox 22, I think. Mm-hmm. The Fox thing, we were told by Lorenzo Fertitta, this is a #1 contender show. The main event is for #1 contender. It's now really become okay, who do we pinpoint as potential stars, and let's give them a little more of a push on this bigger platform.
It's a silo away. It's not in the pay-per-view pipeline.
No.
It's related to it in the sewage system, sort of, or the water system, I should say. Sewage is bad. I didn't mean that, but you know what I mean. Like in the piping, in the plumbing, it's not the direct. It's not the direct artery.
Yeah, interesting times. All right. We have run out of time. We've gone a little longer, so apologies to everyone in the back. But there's a lot to discuss because we were off last week, and we could probably go another 53 minutes, right?
And I don't make any apologies to anyone
You don't?
in the back.
No.
No.
What were we going to say, Jeff?
No, I was going to apologize to absolutely nobody.
Oh, yeah. Very well done. Well done, Jeff Wagenheim.
Yeah,
well
Jeff.
done. I'll apologize because I'm a nice guy. Okay, we're done for this week. We're back next week, so that is probably our last show of 2016. It always kind of bothers me when people say last show of the year and then you're back like the next week. Like, what does that really mean? You know what I mean? It's like when you were in elementary school and you'd say to your friends Christmas break, like, see you next year, but you're back the next week. I'm kind of over that.
Okay, good to know.
All right.
It's a great story.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
That's my odd take of the day. Again, thank you for watching. For Luke, Jeff, I'm Ariel. Hello, Chuck, wherever you are. Back next week. Enjoy the fights.